Last April, I planted 11 different vegetables across my raised beds, and only 4 of them actually produced anything worth harvesting. The other 7 either bolted, stalled out, or just sat there looking sad until I finally pulled them in June. That was 3 years ago. And it taught me something I probably should have learned in my decades of teaching science. Timing in the garden is not just about the calendar, it is about understanding which crops actually thrive when you put them in the ground in April and which ones are just going to fight you every step of the way. So today I have 17 of the most productive vegetables you should be getting into the soil this month, and I have organised them based on what I have seen actually deliver results, not just survive, but genuinely produce. And that last one on this list is honestly the vegetable that changed my entire approach to spring planting after years of overlooking it, so please stick around for that one. I also have a bonus technique at the very end, something I stumbled onto while reading an old Extension Service bulletin that will help every single one of these 17 crops establish faster. It is one of those things that seems almost too simple, but the science behind it is solid. Here is the underlying principle that ties all of this together. April is a transition month, soil temperatures are climbing, day length is increasing rapidly, and most of us are sitting somewhere between the last frost and the real warmth of late spring. The vegetables that produce the most in April are the ones whose biology is specifically tuned to exploit that window, crops that actually prefer cooler soil for root development and longer days for leaf growth. Once I stopped fighting that principle and started working with it, my spring harvests doubled. So let me walk you through what I have learned works, starting with something most people either skip entirely or get wrong. The first vegetable is one I almost did not include because it seems so obvious, but then I remembered how badly I botched it my first few springs. Lettuce. But not just any lettuce, and not just tossing seeds out and hoping for the best. The key is choosing cut and come again varieties like red sails or salad bowl, and succession planting every 10 to 14 days starting in early April. I direct sow seeds about a 1/4 inch deep in rows 6 inches apart. And here is the critical part. I keep the soil consistently moist but not waterlogged during germination, which usually takes 7 to 10 days when soil temperatures are around 50 to 60 degrees Fahrenheit. Lettuce germinates poorly above 75 degrees, which is why April is your golden window. The plant's photosynthetic machinery is optimized for the moderate light intensities and cooler temperatures of spring. Once I started treating lettuce as a precision crop instead of an afterthought, I went from one mediocre harvest to 5 or 6 cuttings from the same planting. Each cut stimulates new growth from the basal meristem, the growth point at the base of the plant. You are essentially harvesting the same plant repeatedly. The productivity per square foot is genuinely remarkable when you do it right. Now, that lettuce bed is going to need some company, and the next crop pairs beautifully with it, both in the ground and on your plate. Spinach is one of those vegetables that actually wants the cold. I am talking about a crop that germinates best between 45 and 65 degrees Fahrenheit at the soil level, which makes early to mid-April absolutely ideal for most zones 5 through 8. The variety that has been most reliable for me is Bloomsdale Longstanding, which has noticeably better bolt resistance than some of the smoother leaf types. I sow seeds 1/2 inch deep, about 2 inches apart in rows 12 inches apart, and I get harvestable leaves in as little as 35 to 40 days. Spinach is a long day plant, meaning it will eventually bolt as day length increases past about 14 hours. That is why April planting is so strategic. You are giving the plant enough time to produce heavily before those long June days trigger flowering. I lost entire spinach crops in May plantings before I understood this photoperiod response. Timing is everything with this one. The third crop I want to talk about surprised me because I used to think of it as a fall vegetable only. Radishes, specifically fast-maturing varieties like Cherry Belle or French Breakfast, are almost absurdly productive in April. I am talking seed to harvest in 22 to 30 days. I direct sow them 1/2 inch deep, 1 inch apart, in rows 6 inches apart, and I thin to 2 inches once the first true leaves appear. The soil temperature sweet spot is 50 to 65 degrees. What makes radishes so productive this time of year is that their rapid root development is driven by the cool, moist conditions that April provides naturally. When soil gets hot, above 70 degrees, the roots become woody and pithy and develop that unpleasant, sharp bite. I once made the mistake of planting radishes in late May, thinking more warmth would mean faster growth. The opposite happened. They grew leaves like crazy and the roots were terrible. April radishes are a completely different vegetable, crisp and mild, and ready before most other things in your garden have even gotten started. If you're finding these tips helpful and you appreciate the science behind why these recommendations work, I would love to have you join me for more videos like this one. Hit that subscribe button and I will keep bringing you evidence-based gardening advice all season long. Now let us get back to the list because we have some real standouts still coming. The next one I want to talk about is peas. And I almost feel guilty about how long it took me to figure out proper April pea planting. For years, I was direct sowing sugar snap peas, specifically the Sugar Ann variety, way too late, and then wondering why my yields were disappointing. The key is getting them in the ground as soon as your soil is workable, and at least 45 degrees Fahrenheit. I plant seeds 1 inch deep, 2 to 3 inches apart, along a trellis or support system about 5 to 6 feet tall. Peas are a legume, which means they partner with rhizobium bacteria in the soil to fix atmospheric nitrogen, actually converting nitrogen gas into a form the plant can use. I inoculate my seeds with rhizobium inoculant before planting, just dampening the seeds slightly and rolling them in the powder. It costs about $4 for a packet that treats several plantings. The difference in plant vigor is noticeable, especially in beds that have not grown legumes before. April planted peas will produce prolifically into June before the heat shuts them down. This next one is a vegetable that rewards patience with staggering productivity. Green beans, specifically bush varieties like Provider or Contender, can go in toward the end of April in zones 7 and warmer, or once your soil hits 60 degrees. I space seeds 2 inches apart and about 1.5 inches deep in rows 18 inches apart. What I love about Provider in particular is its tolerance for cooler soil compared to most bean varieties. Most beans want 70-degree soil, but Provider will germinate reliably at 60, which gives you a 2 to 3 week head start. That head start translates directly into an earlier and longer harvest window. A single row of bush beans 4 feet long can produce 2 to 3 pounds of beans over a 3-week picking period. The trick is picking every 2 to 3 days once pods start forming. If you let pods mature on the plant, it signals the plant to stop flowering. Regular harvesting keeps the plant in reproductive mode. Now, here is one that took me an embarrassingly long time to appreciate, and I say this as someone who taught biology for 30 years, kale. Specifically lacinato kale, sometimes called dinosaur kale or Tuscan kale. I used to dismiss it as a trendy health food, not a serious garden producer. I was completely wrong. Planted from transplants in April, spaced 18 inches apart, a single lacinato kale plant can produce harvestable leaves for 6 months or more. 6 months from one plant. The leaves are sweeter after a light frost, sure, but April planted kale gives you a long runway of production through spring. Into summer, if you provide some afternoon shade, and then right through fall. I start harvesting the lower leaves when they reach about 8 to 10 inches long, always leaving the top cluster intact so the plant keeps generating new growth. The productivity per square foot over the entire season makes kale one of the best returns on investment in any spring garden. Speaking of long producers, the next crop I have for you is Swiss chard. And I want to be specific here because the variety matters a lot. Ford Hook Giant has been the most reliable producer in my experience, though Bright Lights is gorgeous if you want colour. I direct sow chard seeds about 1/2 inch deep, 4 inches apart, in early to mid-April. Chard tolerates a surprisingly wide temperature range, germinating in soil as cool as 50 degrees and continuing to produce through summer heat that would send spinach bolting in a heartbeat. One important detail I learned the hard way. Each chard seed is actually a cluster of multiple seeds, so you will need to thin aggressively. I thin to about 8 to 12 inches between plants once they are a few inches tall. A well-spaced chard plant will produce a continuous supply of leaves from spring through the first hard freeze. I harvest the outer stalks when they are 8 to 12 inches long, and the plant just keeps pushing out new growth from the center. The next vegetable is one where timing and variety selection are Absolutely everything. Carrots. I specifically recommend Nantes type varieties like Bolero or Napoli for April sowing because they mature faster and develop that sweet, tender texture in the moderate temperatures of spring. Here is what I wish someone had told me when I started growing carrots. The soil has to be loose and free of rocks and clumps to at least 8 to 10 inches deep, or you get forked, stunted roots. I learned this after 3 seasons of pulling out what looked like little orange octopuses. I sow seeds directly on the surface and cover with about a quarter inch of fine compost. Then keep the surface moist with a light daily watering until germination, which can take 14 to 21 days when soil is around 55 degrees. Patience during that germination period is critical. I have actually laid a single layer of burlap over the row to hold moisture and removed it as soon as I saw the first feathery leaves poking through, thin to 2 inches apart once they are an inch tall. April sown carrots hit that perfect temperature range for sugar development, and you will taste the difference compared to anything from the store. Something I discovered almost by accident pairs incredibly well with those carrots. Beets, and specifically the Detroit dark red variety or Chioggia if you want something a little more visually interesting. Beets are dual purpose. You get both the root and the greens, which effectively doubles your harvest from a single planting. I sow beet seeds about half an inch deep, 2 inches apart, in rows 12 inches apart, starting in early April. Like chard, each beet seed is actually a multi-germ cluster, so thinning to 3 to 4 inches is essential. April soil temperatures around 50 to 65 degrees are ideal, and you can expect roots ready for harvest in about 55 to 70 days depending on the variety. The greens are ready much sooner, usually within 30 days. I start snipping a few outer leaves per plant once they are 4 to 5 inches tall. This does not significantly reduce root development if you are moderate about it. That dual harvest potential makes beets one of the most space-efficient crops you can plant this month. Now, I want to shift gears a bit because the next crop is one that a lot of people think of as a summer planting. Broccoli planted as transplants in April is enormously productive, and here is why. Broccoli is a cool season crop that actually forms tighter, more flavorful heads when temperatures are between 60 and 70 degrees Fahrenheit. I set out transplants that are about 4 to 6 weeks old, spacing them 18 to 24 inches apart. The variety that has performed best for me is Waltham29, though Green Magic is excellent if you want a slightly earlier harvest. The critical detail most people miss is that after you cut the main head, broccoli continues producing side shoots for weeks, sometimes months. Those side shoots are like bonus harvests that keep coming if you maintain consistent watering of about 1 to 1.5 inches per week. I have gotten the equivalent of 3 or 4 full harvests from a single plant by simply keeping up with the side shoots. But this only works with cool season planting. Hot weather makes the heads flower open rapidly, what we call bolting, and you lose that extended harvest window entirely. Here is one that I want to be honest about because I resisted it for years. Onions from sets planted in April are remarkably productive with almost no effort. I used to think growing onions was not worth the garden space because you can buy them cheaply at the store. Then I actually tracked the math. A single 10-foot row of onion sets planted 3 to 4 inches apart produces 40 to 60 onions at a total cost of about $4 for the sets. The yield per square foot is excellent, and they require almost no maintenance beyond weeding. The important thing to know is that you need to match your variety to your latitude. If you're above the 35th parallel roughly, you need long day varieties like Walla Walla or Copra. Below that line, short day varieties like Texas Sweet are what will form proper bulbs. This has to do with the photoperiod trigger for bulb formation, and getting it wrong means you end up with scallion-sized bulbs instead of full onions. Plant sets about 1 inch deep in April, and you will have full-sized onions by midsummer. The next two vegetables I want to group together because they occupy the same niche in your April garden, and the approach is similar. Turnips and kohlrabi. Both are fast-growing, cool-season crops that most gardeners overlook. For turnips, I recommend the Hakurei variety, a Japanese salad turnip that is ready in about 35 days from direct sowing. Sow seeds a 1/4 inch deep, 1 inch apart, and thin to 4 inches. For kohlrabi, early white Vienna is my go-to variety. Start transplants indoors in March and set them out in April, spaced about 6 inches apart. Both of these vegetables perform best in that 50 to 70 degree range that April provides. The reason I group them is that they fill the same role: fast, reliable production from cool soil with minimal space requirements. Hackere turnips in particular have converted more skeptics than any other vegetable I grow. People who claim they do not like turnips change their minds after tasting one raw, straight from the garden. It is crisp and sweet, nothing like the starchy grocery store turnips most people picture. I want to talk next about a crop that generates an almost unreasonable amount of food from a small space: zucchini. Now, before you say, Steve, zucchini is a warm season crop. Hear me out. In zones 7 and warmer, you can transplant seedlings started indoors 3 to 4 weeks earlier into the garden in late April under row cover protection. I use lightweight floating row cover that adds about 4 to 6 degrees of frost protection. The variety I recommend for April transplanting is Black Beauty or Costata Romanesco. Space plants about 36 inches apart because these things grow large. A single healthy zucchini plant can produce 6 to 10 pounds of fruit over its productive life. The reason late April transplanting works is that you are giving the plant a 2 to 3 week head start on root establishment in cooler soil before the real heat arrives. Once temperatures climb into the 70s and 80s, the plant explodes into production because its root system is already established. I made the mistake for years of waiting until May to direct sow, and I always had a gap in production compared to neighbours who transplanted in late April. The row cover is the key detail that makes this work safely. Now, this next one is going to sound surprising to some of you, and it is the one I teased at the beginning as a genuine game changer. Potatoes planted in April are pound for pound, possibly the single most productive vegetable you can grow in a home garden. I am not exaggerating when I say this completely reframed how I think about spring planting. For years, I grew potatoes haphazardly, tossing some seed potatoes in a trench and hoping for the best. The results were mediocre. Then I started paying attention to the research, specifically a study from the University of Maine Extension that analysed yield data across multiple planting dates. The finding was straightforward. Potatoes planted when soil temperature is between 45 and 55 degrees, which is early to mid-April in most of zones 5 through 7, consistently outperformed later plantings by 20 to 30% in total yield. The reason comes down to root and stolon development. Potatoes form their tubers along underground stems called stolons, and stolon initiation is most active during the cooler soil temperatures of early spring. If you plant later when soil is warm, the plant rushes toward flowering and top growth at the expense of tuber formation. Here is my specific method. I cut seed potatoes into pieces with at least 2 eyes each, let them cure for a day or two until the cut surface is dry, and plant them 4 inches deep and 12 inches apart in trenches about 30 inches apart. As the plants grow, I hill soil or compost around the stems every 2 to 3 weeks, which encourages more stolons and therefore more tubers. The variety that has been most productive for me is Yukon Gold, which matures in about 70 to 90 days and has excellent flavour. Kennebec is my pick for a later maturing, high-yielding storage variety. Last year, from a 10-foot row, I harvested over 30 pounds of Yukon Gold potatoes from an April planting. That is roughly $15 worth of organic potatoes from about $2 in seed potatoes and some compost. When I finally saw those numbers laid out clearly, I understood why potatoes have been a staple crop for centuries. The biology is just perfectly suited to spring planting. And once I aligned my timing with what the plant actually wants, the results spoke for themselves. Now, before I share that bonus technique, I promised, let me walk through a few common mistakes I see, and honestly made myself that these 17 vegetables can help you avoid. The first mistake is waiting too long. A lot of gardeners, myself included for years, treat Memorial Day as the starting gun for the entire garden. But by waiting until late May to plant everything, you're missing the entire cool season window. The vegetables on this list are designed to exploit April conditions. Waiting means shorter harvest windows, more bolting, and lower yields. The second mistake is planting warm season crops too early without protection. The flip side of the first mistake. People get excited in April and put tomato and pepper transplants directly in the ground when nighttime temperatures are still in the 40s. Those plants just sit there stressed, gaining nothing. The better approach is to focus April energy on the crops that actually want cool soil and save the true warm season crops for May. Or use row covers, as I mentioned with the zucchini. The third mistake is not succession planting. If you plant one row of lettuce in early April, and that is it, you get one big harvest and then nothing. Sowing a short row every 10 to 14 days extends your harvest across the entire spring. I did not do this for my first 5 years of gardening, and I always had this feast or famine cycle that drove me crazy. The fourth mistake is ignoring soil temperature and only watching air temperature. I used to go by the weather forecast exclusively. But soil temperature, which you can check with a simple probe thermometer for about $10, is what actually determines germination success. A warm, sunny day does not mean your soil has caught up yet. Once I started checking soil temperature before planting, my germination rates improved dramatically. Now for that bonus technique I mentioned at the very beginning. This is something I found in an old cooperative extension bulletin from the 1970s, and when I tested it, I was genuinely impressed. It is called pre-sprouting or chitting, and it works for peas, beans, corn, and really any large seeded crop. You place your seeds between layers of damp paper towels inside a loosely closed plastic bag, set it somewhere warm, around 70 degrees, and wait 2 to 3 days until you see small root tips emerging. Then you carefully plant those pre-sprouted seeds into your garden soil. What this does is compress the vulnerable germination phase into a controlled environment where soil-borne fungi and cold, wet conditions cannot rot the seed. I tested this side by side one spring with sugar peas. The pre-sprouted seeds emerged in 4 days. The direct sown seeds in the same row took 12 days, and I lost about 30% to rot because we had an unexpected cold rain. Pre-sprouting reduced my seed loss from roughly 1 in 3 to almost 0. It takes 5 minutes of preparation, and it is applicable to nearly every large seeded vegetable on this list. Try it with your peas or beans this April, and I think you will be convinced. So there you have it, 17 vegetables that are genuinely at their most productive when planted in April. Plus a simple technique to help them establish even faster. I would love to hear from you. Which of these are you planting this month, or is there a productive April crop you think I should have included? Drop that in the comments because I learn as much from your experiences as you might from mine. Happy gardening, and I will see you in the next video.